Welcome to Rediscovering the Beatles. I'm Mark Morse, and I know what you're thinking. Ringo Starr versus John Lennon, who's the greatest? Well, of course. John Lennon could never play percussion like Ringo Starr. But that's not what this video is about. Let me go over a couple interesting facts. Many find it hard to believe that Ringo Starr had two #1 hits before John Lennon ever got his first #1 hit. But that's exactly what happened. Some assume that John Lennon's 1971 hit, Imagine, made it all the way to #1. But in the United States, it peaked at only #3. Ringo's Photograph and I'm 16 were both chart toppers in 1973. Photograph being co-written by George Harrison. Both songs appeared on Ringo's album, Ringo. That's the only Ringo album I personally own, but I'm going to rectify that soon. John Lennon didn't have a hit until Whatever Gets You Through the Night, done with Elton John in 1974. This was the only hit that #1 hit that John Lennon would have in his lifetime after the Beatles. He did get Starting Over, did make the #1 slot, but that was 3 weeks after his death in 1980. And personally, when I hear the Beatles talk about the Beatle days, I prefer to listen to Ringo reminisce. Ringo seems to be more even-handed than the other three. He approaches the subject with more of a sense of humor. When sometimes you listen to the old interviews with John Lennon and George Harrison and Paul McCartney, sometimes you get this sense of a real bitterness. Ringo doesn't seem to have that, and I find his reminiscence a lot more palatable. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. We're really not talking about who's the greatest between John Lennon and Ringo Starr. What I'm here to talk about today is the song I'm the Greatest, which was written by John Lennon and performed by Ringo Starr on his album, Ringo. I personally love this song. It's one of my favorite solo Beatles songs. Not only did Lennon write it and tailor it for Ringo Starr, but George Harrison plays on it too, giving it sort of a Beatles sound. I really attribute that to Harrison's guitar arrangement. But it's a great song. 3 Beatles are on it, plus Klaus Voormann on the bass. Let me tell you a little bit about its history. This song was written by John Lennon in 1970. It was a wry commentary on his rise to fame as a Beatle. Of course, it uses the catchphrase of Muhammad Ali, who they had met in 1964. Apparently, John Lennon was inspired to write this song after he caught a broadcast of the film A Hard Day's Night. He wrote the song as a sarcastic commentary on his life. In July of 1971, towards the end of his Imagine recordings, John Lennon did a demo of this song. He put it aside until 1973 when Ringo went to his 3 former bandmates and asked them for songs for his Ringo album. John Lennon decided to take the song and tailor it to Ringo's point of view. John Lennon was uncomfortable with the idea of releasing it himself. He thought people would take it too literally and he would get a lot of controversy out of it. But he felt Ringo would not have that problem. Interestingly enough, Yoko Ono suggested the lines about the wife and kids looking at Ringo and thinking he's great. The Ringo Sessions sort of started an atmosphere of reconciliation between the Beatles. You have this song with John Lennon and George Harrison joining Ringo on, and then Paul McCartney himself contributed a song, 6 O'Clock, which he performed on with his wife Linda. Some of this is thought to be because of John and George and Ringo severing ties with Alan Klein, which had started a lot of the problems in the first place. Klaus Vormann also says there was sort of a rallying feeling about the other Beatles gathering around Ringo to help establish himself as a solo artist. They did a fine job. There's kind of a funny story about how George Harrison became involved in this project. He was in town for some business meetings, and he had heard Lennon was at the studio recording with Ringo Starr. So he called the studio and spoke to the producer, Richard Perry, and asked if he could come down. When Lennon heard of this, he said, "Hell yes, tell him to get down here right away and help me finish writing this bridge," which I've always thought was kind of a sweet story. So this song started as Lennon's sarcastic kind of bitter look at his rise to fame as a Beatle. But once turned over to Ringo Starr, it became more of a light-hearted, sardonic tribute to the Beatles. And this feeling is one I enjoy much more. I will link to both the songs below. Also, I would be remiss not to mention that Billy Preston also made some musical contributions to this song. Of course, we all know that all the Beatles are the greatest in their own way. I will tell you a funny story. When I was in 7th or 8th grade and I had my first girlfriend, her name was Penny. One of the reasons, and really the biggest reason we got together, was because we had this mutual love of the Beatles. One time I found out that her favorite Beatle was Ringo Starr, and I just had such a hard time with that. My favorite Beatle was and is John Lennon. And so we had a lot of discussions about that. Well, Penny, if you're out there, just know that I understand more. I can see why Ringo would be your favorite Beatle. Thanks for watching, guys, and feel free to subscribe if you like this. I'm have lots more stuff on the horizon, and I so appreciate you hanging around, even if you don't subscribe. Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you all very soon.